Ms Lauder, your moment.
Madam Speaker, I move the motion standing in my name on the notice paper relating to the proposed disallowance of DI 2017-208, being the Planning and Development Lease Variation Charges Determination 2017 number 2.
The motion be agreed to. Mr Gentleman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The government won't be supporting.
I do apologise. Ms Lauder.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The lease variation charge is something that we on this side of the chamber have often talked about. It's a policy that has never raised the amount of revenue that the government have anticipated it to raise. We've also seen a remission of LVC to some developers worth millions of dollars in some cases. So it's an inconsistent tax on development, and it's not been particularly effective to this point. But earlier this year in the budget, this Labor Greens government announced an increase of 300% to the lease variation charge on unit titles as part of the 2016-17 budget. And, Madam Speaker, I think that increase showed the contempt that this government has for people of Canberra. The increase was done without consulting with the property and the building industry, and it appears to be just an exorbitant tax grab. I asked the Planning Minister when he found out about this particular tax. I asked whether the Treasurer applied this tax behind the Planning Minister's back. But no, the Minister for Planning said, and I quote from his answer to my question, he said, "The Environment Planning and Sustainable Development Director was involved in the proposed changes for the lease variation charge, LVC, for unit titling as part of the budget consultation process." And further he went on to say, "The Directorate, as in the Planning Directorate, administers LVC but is not responsible for setting the LVC charges. That's a Treasury responsibility. But the Planning Directorate did provide data to Treasury about LVC determinations." So, Madam Speaker, in the budget this year, it appears that the government is anticipating quite a high revenue, $125 million. Zeros, it is late in the afternoon. And in the unit titling, it said that the government would increase the codified LVC required to enable unit titling on certain residential leases to a flat fee of $30,000 per dwelling. This will improve consistency with the per unit charges, which apply to other types of residential lease variations and taking effect from 1 July. However, we did earlier this year, Madam Speaker, have a motion in the Assembly relating to the LVC. It noted that the LVC system is complex and presents opportunities for rationalisations and improvements in consistency. And we talked in this place about a review of the full suite of LVC and remissions that apply to residential and mixed-use developments, to include consideration of options for simplification of charges, to consider charges in context with the factors that influence the financial viability of redevelopment, including zoning, etc., to be conducted in consultation with the community, industry groups and other stakeholders, to be closely coordinated with the review of housing affordability policies, etc., etc., and to introduce charges, any resulting changes to charges by the 1920 budget cycle, with appropriate communication and transitional arrangements as necessary. This is a motion that is important. It includes consultation, it includes careful review of all the elements of the LVC, which is not what happened in this case in the budget this year. So this year we have the opportunity now to ask this Assembly to demand that these types of changes with no consultation stop. We have the opportunity today to say enough is enough. You can't make these charges without suitable consultation. We have the opportunity to say to this government, go and review the LVC before you implement these changes. Putting forward this notice of disallowance of the disallowable instrument is, Madam Speaker, the last-ditch effort to salvage something from this debacle of the huge increase in the LVC, the 300% increase in the LVC on unit titling. Earlier in the year when this came out, we had some comments from Ms Lakuta in the paper. She said she thought the increase was unfair. She talked about the Greens being champions for housing affordability. Yet in the budget, they supported this increase. They talk about the importance of housing affordability, but I've yet to see them actually stand up and make it happen by voting against these types of charges. Many people will be worse off because of this decision. Many young people will be worse off. Many young people enter the housing market for the first time with a new unit or a townhouse or an apartment or a smaller housing model because they can't afford a big house in the suburb or even a smaller house in the suburbs. And a smaller thing such as a unit is a way for them to enter into the housing market and start on their journey of the great Australian dream of home ownership. At this point, it's something that we all still aspire to. But this big tax, this big 300% increase in the LVC on unit titling, will affect young people. It will affect other first home buyers. And it will affect those who want to age in place. So we're seeing young people being locked out of the housing ownership market. But it will also affect those who want to rent because any increase in the price of units will be reflected in the rent that landlords charge. A recent QBE report forecasts there will be double-digit house price increase over the next 7 years in Canberra. And this is going to make it even more difficult for young Canberrans and first home buyers to enter into the housing market. But on top of that, the government is looking to increase LVC on unit titles by 300%. Madam Speaker, I've said it before in this place when we've spoken about it. I've said it in estimates, I've said it in annual reports, hearings, I'm sure. I'm gobsmacked by this change, this 300% increase in any other area of our life. People wouldn't stand for this, a 300% increase. It just doesn't stack up. This change will encourage people to build their house and retain it. It won't encourage them to build and sell. It won't encourage more land being put to market, but it will encourage the building of, and I think I'm quoting Ms Lakuta and probably many other people, the building of McMansions, I think she said in her quote in the newspaper. Back in July, Ms Lakuta said, we, the Greens, were particularly concerned about the impact of these changes on housing affordability and infill. The industry has told us that it will lead to a major reduction in townhouse development in existing suburbs. I'm concerned that the perverse outcome of this new change could be McMansions in inner city suburbs, rather than the missing middle, smaller dwellings such as townhouses and terraces that we know our community actually want in our city. So, Madam Speaker, the government didn't even consult before they brought through this 300% change. They didn't consult with the Master Builders Association, who could have given them a bit of a glimmer into what would happen with this change. They didn't consult with the Property Council. They didn't speak with those who would be most in the know, those working on the ground and in the sector, who could be able to give them a bit of insight into how these changes would impact on the sector. Had they consulted, they would have known prior to the estimates, prior to the community day where master builders and the property council appeared, I found out
He stands on his feet.
that townhouses are a good urban infill option, particularly in the older established suburbs where streetscapes are not necessarily suited to unit developments but prime for a terrace, which is where this Schedule 1 land is situated. These significant changes, this 300% increase to the lease variation charge, will hinder these urban infill developments. Prior to this change, if a developer bought a block in a suburb such as Dixon or Turner, or any suburbs built before 1971, to convert to units, they would have faced a strata title change of $7,500 a unit for the first 3 units and $5,000 a unit after that. This charge is hiked to $30,000 per unit. For a 6-unit development, as an example, this would push the bill just for the LVC component from $37,500 to $180,000. This increase will move many developments from viable to unviable, or many developments from affordable to unaffordable if they go ahead. This is a perverse outcome. This is not what we should be looking for. The cost associated with an 8-dwelling development, as another example, would jump from $47,500 to $240,000. Once again, moving development from viable to unviable, and potentially, if it goes ahead, housing from affordable to unaffordable. Either way, this 300% increase does not address affordability in any way. It's the complete opposite of helping affordability. It's clear to see that increasing LVC by 300% can make a lot of developments, if not all developments, unviable. Despite this, the government has decided that the creation of a dual occupancy LVC of $60,000, and we've already seen in the short period after this was announced in the budget, a rush of development applications that were put in. 152 of them, in fact, to October this year, of developers desperately trying to beat this increase. That's up from 90 developments in 16-17 and 60 development applications in 15-16. So 152 just up to October, as developers have tried to beat this projected increase. It's too often, Madam Speaker, that we've seen policy on the run like this. Policy development without proper consultation, without talking to those people who will understand the impact on the market. As the now CEO of Master Builders said during the budget estimates, I'll quote, "Remember, it was only a few months ago that we were having similar discussions with Icon Water about similar charges that they were seeking to introduce almost overnight with very little consultation and very little transition." So we're not learning our lessons, Madam Speaker. We're not learning from previous mistakes about lack of consultation. So this is a government that's getting a name for itself, of the government that doesn't consult, the government that's arrogant, believes it knows better than those who are actually working in the sector. Because of this arrogance, the government have already had to backtrack on this change, making conditional arrangements for the next 6 months and then the review in 18 months' time. Had the government done its job on consultation from the start, there wouldn't have been any need to backtrack. Madam Speaker, good policy happens when the government consults appropriately and consults genuinely with those in the sector. This motion to disallow is the last-ditch effort to save housing affordability in this sector, and I commend the motion to the Assembly.
Thank you, Ms Lauder, and I do apologise for the confusion at the beginning of your motion. The question is that Ms Lauder